And good afternoon. And my name is Evan Weiner, and I want to thank Vicki for inviting me. We've done Zoom talks for the last year. And next time, which is next month, I will be in the venue and talking with a mask on. But that's how things are these days. And I go through a bunch of masks as I talk, but it works. Anyway, again, my name is Evan Weiner. My background is radio, TV, newspapers, magazines. And this talk came about thanks to a woman by the name of Danella Theory. She's in Chester, New Jersey. She is the librarian at the Chester Library. And I'm doing a talk on the early days of TV, and the last 4 or 5 minutes is about how Lucille Ball becomes the most powerful businesswoman in Hollywood. And as I'm completing this, she says, "You're coming back here on August 5th. I said, "What do you mean?" She says, Lucille Ball's birthday is on August 6th, and I have an opening on August 5th, and you're going to do a talk about Lucy. I said, "I got 5 minutes." She said, "I know you. You'll have more than 5 minutes." And within a week, I had about 54 minutes. And that's what we're going to do. 54 minutes of Lucy in her time, whether it's the 1920s, 30s, 40s, or the 1950s. Lucille Ball was the most powerful businesswoman in Hollywood. And she did that, breaking the glass ceiling, before Betty Friedan even thought about writing The Feminine Mistake, before Gloria Steinem went underground as a Playboy bunny to report about what it was like being a Playboy bunny, before Bella Abzug had a political career. She did not go to college, so there is no MBA from Harvard or Yale or NYU or Stanford or Wharton. She didn't go to college at all. She just made decisions, stuck by it, and she's a survivor. And she won. She won at a heavy price, but she won. She was born in Jamestown, New York on August 6, 1911. Her father was a telephone lineman in the days where it was very, very dangerous to be a telephone lineman, and he was killed in an accident in 1915. And that left Lucille, her mother Desiree, along with Desiree's father and mother, Fred Hunt and Flora Bell Hunt, to raise her and a brother. Fred Hunt inadvertently almost killed Lucy's career in 1936, but that would not come out until 1953, where he almost destroyed her career. But it was just one more obstacle. There were many obstacles that Lucille Ball had to overcome to become Lucille Ball, the famous comedian. She was the most unlikely of Hollywood moguls. She leaves home at the age of 17. 1928. She leaves Jamestown, New York, and she leaves high school for Broadway because she's going to trip the light fantastic, the roar of the grease paint. She's going to be a star on Broadway, an absolute star. And she goes to acting school. Betty Davis is in her acting school class, and the instructors there say, "Hey, wait a minute. Why are you here? You ain't going to make it. You don't have it. Why don't you go home? You don't have any talent." That was 1928. It would take until 1948, 20 years later, before Lucy had her first really successful venture, which would be on radio. She would come up with the idea of Desilu Studios, about 2 decades later, after constantly being rejected in New York and in Hollywood. Eventually, she and Desi Arnaz would form a production company, have studios, and they would produce shows like Star Trek. Lucille Ball is the mother of Star Trek. The executive in the 1960s, she rebuilt the studio in the 1960s. Hollywood's most powerful businesswoman. She buys out her ex-husband and friend, Desi Arnaz. She has complete control of the company. She is the first woman to own a major studio. 3 of the shows that were developed with Desi in 1957, The Untouchables, and without Desi, Mission Impossible, Star Trek, became successful movie franchises. Star Trek is worth probably well over $1 billion today. But when she's modeling in New York back in 1929, 1930, Star Trek is the farthest thing from her mind. In fact, owning a company is the farthest thing from her mind. It's all about survival for her. She gets to New York. She wants to be an actress. Nobody has any faith in her being an actress on Broadway. But she's a pretty young girl. She's 17, 18, 19 years old, and she becomes a cigarette model for Chesterfield. And she becomes a model in other things like nude modeling and prostitution. Her boyfriend is a mobster, and she's trying to get by in New York any way she can. And it doesn't really work. By 1932, she realizes that New York is not the place for her. She decides she's going out to Hollywood, and she lands a job. The job is as a Goldwyn girl for Shmuel Goldfish, Samuel Goldwyn. She goes to Hollywood as a Goldwyn girl, and she does get a part. It's a very minor part, but she's only 22 years old. She's a starlet. Who knows what's going to happen? She's in the movie Roman Scandals, which was starring Eddie Cantor. And Eddie Cantor was at the height of his popularity in 1933, including the song Making Whoopee. And this vehicle does not work. I mean, it works for Eddie Cantor. You know, Eddie Cantor, it was a star. It doesn't work for her. Nowhere. She goes nowhere. So she wants to become a stunt girl because she wants to survive in Hollywood. And let me tell you something about stunt. I knew a woman by the name of Aretha Thompson. She passed away about 11 years ago. She was Humphrey Bogart's mistress. She was the queen of New Orleans. And she was a very successful restaurant owner in Southern California. She was Miss Arizona around 1938, somewhere around there, maybe earlier. And she was in the Miss America pageant. And she, like Lucy, had stars in her eyes. She was going to become a major star. Nothing happened for Verita. She ended up becoming a stunt girl. And we're sitting out in Santa Monica one day at the bar that Sheryl Crow sung about in her first big song on Santa Monica Boulevard. And I said, what'd you do as a stunt girl? And she's half in the bag, because she always was. And she said, honey, let me tell you, you get on a horse and you fall off a horse. You get in a building and fall out of the building. You're tied to railroad tracks. Train is coming. You're doing all this stuff. You're falling all over the place. Honey, I had to get out of it. And she did within a year. But that's what Lucy was doing. And what made it even more amazing is Lucy apparently had some form of rheumatoid arthritis in the New York days. And my wife has rheumatoid arthritis, and I know how debilitating it could be. And yet Lucy's doing all of these stunts. So she becomes a stunt girl. And there's a guy who has an eye on her. A guy by the name of Buster Keaton, probably heard of him. Silent motion picture star. And he looks and he looks and he looks and he says, you know, you have some talent. She has somebody who finally believes in her that she has some talent. He saw some comedic promise in Lucy and said, hey, I'll help you. I'm going to teach you about timing, teach you about the ability to use props for laughs. And I'm going to show you how to fall and not get hurt. And he's working with her and working with her and working with her, and he thinks she's ready. And he calls up Columbia Pictures, talks to Cohn over there, and says to Cohn, hey, I got a girl for you. Her name is Lucille Ball. And I think she's ready for the big time. Harry Cohn is at Columbia Pictures and says, all right, Buster, all right. Send her over. He does. And she's in her first movie. It's not a real movie. It's a two-reeler starring Moe, Larry, and Curly. That is Lucy's introduction to a speaking role, her first speaking role in comedy. She lands a contract with Harry Cohn in Columbia University. She's cast in the short film serial with the Three Stooges, Moe, Larry, and Curly, called Three Little Pigskins. That would be her first venture into the world of comedy. You know, it's only an 18-minute movie, and the Stooges over the years, you know, there's mixed emotion about them. But you know what? They made Columbia a lot of money. They didn't make a lot of money because their contracts, they got screwed over in their contracts, but they made Columbia a lot of money. And they were funny. They were stupid, but they were funny. Eye fights, pokes like that in the eye, pulling in the ears, pulling up the hair, and then, hitting into all that stuff. And Lucille Ball learned a lot from the Three Stooges. And she said, they introduced her to slapstick and physical comedy, and she was always grateful to Mo, Larry, and Curly about that. Meanwhile, Harry Cohn, just like the New York guys, she doesn't have any talent. Get out of here. She does. But somewhere along the line, she became friends with Ginger Rogers' mother. And Ginger Rogers' mother used to give everybody the same advice if they were the starlets, including her daughter. Hey, if you want to make it big in this town, sleep with the boss. That's what Ginger Rogers told Lucille Ball. I don't know if she slept with the boss or not, but she did land a job as an actor in the movie Stage Door at RKO. And this was supposed to be the big hit in 1937 for RKO. And it was. Gregory LaCava cast a brown-haired Lucille Ball to play Ginger Rogers' dance partner in Stage Door. It starred Katharine Hepburn, Ann Miller, and Eve Arden. And it was the big effort for the year for the studio. But Howard Hughes' studio. But while it was a big hit at the box office, does nothing for Lucy's career. And Lucy is now getting older. She's 26. And there are younger women coming to Hollywood. She's getting old and she's going nowhere. She goes over to MGM and she's getting older, as I said. And MGM puts her in the movie with the Marx Brothers, Groucho, Chico, and Harpo. It's called Room Service. Not one of the great movies in the Marx Brothers catalog. It's down near the bottom. I mean, the great movies in the Marx Brothers catalog was with Paramount and the great writers, Duck Soup, Monkey Business, Horse Feathers. Night at the Opera was an MGM movie. The thing is about Lucy, she strikes up some sort of relationship with Harpo. Harpo is on her show in 1955. And you might remember the mirror scene if you ever watched the movie Duck Soup with the brothers mimicking themselves in the mirror. Well, Lucy does that with Harpo in 1955 on I Love Lucy. Tell them Groucho sent you. Well, maybe not for Room Service. She goes from RKO to MGM. And she's not really doing all that much. I mean, she's getting work. But it's not really great work. She struggles in Hollywood for many, many years. She appears in these B movies, hard-boiled drama films, romantic comedies. And throughout the 30s and 40s, she's in these B movies, earning the nickname the Queen of the B pictures. They were the picture after the main picture where people, some of them walked out. Yeah, they were probably good movies, but they weren't the movie that people came for. But she's eking out a living. In 1940, life changes. She's 29. And she meets a 23-year-old guy by the name of Desi Arnaz. Desi Arnaz is a Cuban exile. His family was rich. His family was politically powerful in Cuba, but the eventual Cuban dictator, Batista, led something called the Sergeant's Revolution, or Sergeant's Revolt, 1933, that upended the Cuban government. And Desi's family is forced to flee. His father and everybody forced to flee. They end up in Miami, literally with the backs, with the shirts on their back. And he decides he's going to get involved in showbiz, whether it's a career as a band leader or an actor. And he meets her in 1940, 23-year-old Desi Arnaz. He is here, an actor with a band, and he meets Lucille Ball. 1940 is a big year for Lucy. Not only does she meet Desi, but she's in a movie called Dance Girl Dance. She plays the role of Bubbles, and people say, hey, wait a minute. She isn't all that bad after all. But she's getting old, too old for being a starlet. That year, she's also in another movie called Too Many Girls, alongside Desi Arnaz. It's ironic in a way, because Lucy and Desi's marriage could be characterized as too many girls. Lucy and Desi eloped in November of 1940, but they very rarely see each other because she's busy. She's doing a lot of the movies. She's doing radio. She's a journeyman actress. And Desi's on tour. He does occasional movies. Basically, he's on tour with his band. And the newlyweds seldom see each other. And in 1944, Lucy decides she's had enough of Desi and it's time to divorce him. She's 33 years old and she hears rumors about his drinking and infidelity, but she decides, I'll give him one more try. And she does. Meanwhile, she's in a bunch of movies like The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert. That's an interesting combination because both Eddie Albert and Lucille Ball had a problem in the 1950s that could have ended both of their careers. In the 1940s, she was in several feature-length comedies, including Another Ironic Name, Her Husband's Affair, Miss Grant Takes Richmond with William Holden. My old friend Verita dated William Holden. She also dated Jimmy Cagney. She told me Jimmy Cagney knew fluent Yiddish. The Fuller Brush Girl with Eddie Albert, and 2 Bob Hope movies, Sorrowful Jones and Fancy Pants. 1948, Lucy, at the age of 37, gets her big break after 20 years. And here's a question. Did television kill the radio star? Because she becomes a radio star in 1948. Now, if you take a look at that picture, you can see how radio actors didn't have to memorize lines. They just had to be familiar with the dialogue. The real stars of the radio shows were the people who went, the sound effects guy, walking up the steps. Lucy was just an actress or an actor reading off a script. But did television kill the radio star? Let's talk about that a little bit. In 1948, CBS was going to put a show on called Our Miss Brooks. And it was supposed to go on July 5th, 1948. But it wasn't ready to go on the air. Meanwhile, CBS had an audition program called My Favorite Husband. And they put that on because Our Miss Brooks isn't available. And it's always supposed to be a one-off deal. It's always supposed to be on once on CBS on July 5th, 1948. Only because Our Miss Brooks wasn't ready and it would be ready the week after. They put the show on and the show is a hit. The studio audience likes it. The radio audience likes it. And CBS executives like it. It's a positive response. So they say, hey, wait a minute. This could be a hit for us. We can make some money off of it. So they put My Favorite Husband on. Lee Bowman was not available to do the radio series. It goes on in July of 1948, and Richard Denning takes Lee Bowman's place. And this turns Lucille Ball's career around, and she becomes a big star. Or she's on the road to become a big star. And there she is, My Favorite Husband, with her red hair at that point. And you can see she is not a young-looking woman by this point anymore. So any career as a leading lady in films is gone. She just doesn't have the look. And there is Richard Denning. My Favorite Husband featured Lucille Ball, opposite Richard Denning. The radio show was written by Jess Oppenheimer, Madeline Pugh, and Bob Carroll Jr. Those writers were integral to Lucy's success on radio, and they would follow her to TV. And Denning, well, they thought about having him go to TV as well, because in 1950, it's proposed to Lucy that she goes to TV. My Favorite Husband, 2 people live together and like it. My Favorite Husband was the first radio series to star the motion picture musical comedy performer, not star, performer, Lucille Ball. Her co-star of the CBS comedy show was Richard Denning. Ball and Denning were Liz and George Cooper, a happy couple who would get themselves into all kinds of domestic scraps. Jell-O was one of the sponsors. It's important to know. Wilbur Hatch conducted the orchestra because in the radio show, or when they did radio shows, there were orchestras in there as well to entertain the people. They had two best friends, Rudolph Atterbury, played by Gail Gordon, and his wife, Iris, played by B. Benedict. The series would debut in 1948. All of the elements are there for I Love Lucy, including a sponsor. 1950, CBS says to Lucy, we want you to do a TV show. And Lucy, of course, is, hey, I'm 39 years old, right? I've never had an offer like this. I'm going to do it. Or am I going to do it? She's been around a long time, 22 years by this point. And she knew talent, and her instinct was, well, you know, my marriage is kind of in trouble, and my husband is pretty funny. Let's have Desi being my husband. And CBS say, no, 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 no. Nope, nope, no. Ain't broken. We're not fixing it. It's going to be Richard Denning. Well, 39 weeks commitment. Desi's off the road for 39 weeks. That's good for me. Yeah, I want him. You've asked me to do the show. You want me to do this show. You want me to bring the writers in. You want me to move from radio. I want Desi. Now, Lucy has no bargaining power. Absolutely no bargaining power. Yeah, she's been on radio for 2 years, and it's been kind of a hit on 2 years, but it's just a little radio show, and radio's on its way out. Network TV is 4 years old by that point. TV is 22 years old at that point. And, you know, CBS doesn't have to play ball with Lucy. I offer you a show. You don't have to make demands. And CBS are upset with the demand. So is Jell-O, the potential sponsor, because here's the problem. Nobody thinks the American public would accept Desi as the husband of a red-blooded American girl from Jamestown, New York. Desi's not American. It's Cuban. It's Cuban exile. CBS and Jell-O said, Richard Denning ain't broke, don't fix it. We want him as the co-star. Jell-O says, we're out of here. They washed their hands of the project. Philip Morris Tobacco would replace Jell-O. Lucy wanted to save her marriage, and working together would help that. And also, she felt Desi was talented. And yeah, they were also married. But let's go back to 1950 America. Let's go back to 1950 America. CBS talks to Lucy, and Lucy says, you either have both of us or none of us. Eventually, CBS would break down. They had doubts about Desi. He was Cuban, strong Cuban accent. Oh, and by the way, Lucy and Desi were an interracial or multi-ethnic couple. In 1950 America, that is not a good thing. See, you got to go back to the election of 1876, Rutherford B. Hayes and Samuel Tilden, to understand why CBS feels that there's a problem, why Jell-O feels there's a problem with Lucy and Desi. Oh yeah, they were married. Yeah, they were married. But interracial marriage was illegal in parts of the United States. The American Civil Rights Movement had been stalled since 1875. Desegregation in the South ended with the Hayes-Tilden presidential election, which was disputed. So the Republicans and Democrats sat down and worked out a deal. Democrats said, we'll give you the White House. We'll give you the Oval Office. But we want federal troops out of the South, in South Carolina, in Louisiana, and we want states' rights there. We want home rule. If you give us that, we'll give you the Oval Office. They did. Rutherford B. Hayes did. One of his first things in office was get the troops out of the South. Interracial marriage at that point was illegal in more than a dozen states. In 1950, it was illegal in 17 states. Interracial marriage did not become legal in the United States until a Supreme Court decision in 1967 involving Mildred Jeter, Richard Loving, were both arrested, married legally in Washington, D.C., both arrested when they went to Virginia because interracial marriage was illegal in Virginia. They sued, goes up to the Supreme Court in 1967, and interracial marriage is made legal. That's the big problem. So Lucy and Desi have to overcome that problem. How do you do it? You go on tour and you prove to people that you can be believable as husband and wife, even though you are husband and wife. But Desi's Cuban. During the summer of 1950, Lucy and Desi go on tour before a live audience to prove to CBS that Desi would be believable as her husband, even though he was her husband in real life. They took a Cuban clown with them too. Everybody laughed. They thought it was great. Nobody thought about Lucy and Desi as an interracial couple. CBS said, great, let's do it. Let's start the show in 1951. In 1951, Lucy and Desi decide, okay, let's do the pilot film, but we're paying for it, not you. We're going to own the show. CBS is like, yeah, good, go ahead. We don't sink any money into this. And if it never goes anywhere, we're not at the $5,000. There are demands. Lucy wants Carl Front to be the guy who's the cinematographer of the show. Not a big demand. This is the big demand. She wants to do the show from her home in Los Angeles. Ain't going to be New York. Ain't going to be Chicago, where the TV centers in 1951 because of microwave interconnections and coaxial cable, which wired Chicago to Philadelphia, New York, etc. Although it was pioneered in 1950, shows came out of Los Angeles live with coaxial cable and microwave connections. The show of shows, no, rather the Colgate Comedy Hour with Jerry Lewis and Dean Martin in California, Eddie Cantor in New York, and Abbott and Costello in Chicago, all seamlessly linked together. I Love Lucy was one of the pioneering shows. Oh, getting back to LA, the reason why they didn't want it in LA, because shows were shot live. And then they were shot live for the people locally in New York, Chicago, but not in LA. Then the shows were shot by a camera and they were sent out, cycled out to other markets like Los Angeles, and they looked second rate. They didn't want any second rate shows in New York, but Lucy and Desi said, hey, don't worry about it. We're going to pick up the costs. We're going to have multiple simultaneously filming cameras, live studio audience, band in the audience, all that other stuff. And it's going to be pristine, 35 millimeter film. It's not going to be broadcast live, which most shows were in those days. And CBS said, okay, you're paying for it, right? Yeah, we're paying for it. Groucho was done like that. Other shows done like that around that time or a year before your Showtime, the Stu Irwin Show, and The Life of Riley with William Bendix. Jerry Fairbanks developed the multiple camera film production for TV in 1950, and Groucho with Fenneman. That's the way that show is done. And they used to sit there for about 4 hours trying to get down to about 26 minutes. And that starts a year before I Love Lucy. Remember I said Lucy knew talent? She really did know talent. Why Desi? Perfect foil for Lucy. Good comedic timing, an expressive face, right amount of fluster as the husband, Ricky, mispronounced and Latinized words, which added to the comedy. Within 4 months of its debut, Lucy was the #1 show in New York and the #1 show soon after that around the United States. It's a smash hit. Look, Lucy and Ethel, they're so happy together, and Desi is shocked, and there is Fred Burks, and he's looking. It's a smash hit. It's a smash hit. CBS, it's a smash hit. Not only that, CBS doesn't have to pay all that much money for it because Lucy and Desi own the film. They're paying for the film. Turns out to be a brilliant business move. Brilliant business move. Because at the time, 1951, 52, nobody thought anybody would ever watch a rerun. Not going to happen. They're not watching a show for the second time. Although, back in those days, television stations were coming on and on and on and on, and they could plug a rerun here and there for the new show, for the new station, say in Vermillion, South Dakota, or somewhere else. Lots of new stations came on. The deal? Desi and Lucy get the ownership. They take $1,000 salary cut. So everything is great. Everything is great after the first year. And then Lucy's pregnant, and nothing is great. It's 1952 America. You can't have a pregnant woman on TV. Just can't have a pregnant woman on TV. It just doesn't work. Doesn't work at all. Lucy and Desi almost stand I Love Lucy after they learn that she's having a second baby. 1952 America. It's considered too racy for a visibly pregnant woman to be on TV. Television had censorship. Lucy and Desi were not allowed to say the word pregnant. Jess Oppenheimer, who Lucy is looking at adoringly, he's looking at her adoringly, and Desi is Lucy. That is the cast party for the last show of the year. See you in August. Oppenheimer is the showrunner, is the producer and head writer, and really runs the show. And he has an idea. He says, "Why don't we write the pregnancy into the show?" Here's the problem: pregnant woman doesn't appear on stage. Television's a young medium. At that point, it's only 24 years old, and network TV is only 6 years old. But they don't have any pregnant women on. So this is a huge risk for everybody concerned because they don't want to offend anybody, and they felt that they were going to offend people if she's pregnant. So Lucy, Desi, and Oppenheimer are having to put this together from the creative end, and CBS and the show's sponsor, Philip Morris, have to sell it to an audience that this woman is pregnant. You don't see pregnant women on TV or on stage on Broadway or in movies. It just doesn't happen, or vaudeville. You can't have a pregnant woman on. It just doesn't work. But anyway, it does. The storyline that Oppenheimer writes, Pugh writes, and Carol writes, it actually works. CBS says, all right, you could mention she's pregnant. Yeah, but don't go overboard. Keep it as low as possible. The executives of CBS did not want to cause much of a stir. 1952 America, oh wow, she's pregnant. How could that be? She's married. Married people have babies and families. And there is Lucy and Desi. According to Lucy, in the early fall 1952, when I was beginning to look pretty big, we did 7 shows concerning my pregnancy. These films were screened by a priest, a minister, and a rabbi for any possible violation of good taste. It was the CBS network that objected to using the word pregnant. They made us say expectant. So a priest, a minister, and a rabbi walk into a TV set, and they sit down and they watch a film. The 3-man religious committee head doth protest. What's wrong with pregnant? They were heartily in favor of what we were doing, showing motherhood as a happy, wholesome, normal family event. And the pregnancy does work. By the way, Lucy was the first woman to wear pants on TV. Mary Tyler Moore tried to wear pants on TV in 1960 in the Dick Van Dyke Show. And CBS really got very, very, very upset. They didn't notice that Lucy wore pants on TV. They got upset because they thought viewers would be upset because Mary Tyler Moore looked too good in capri pants in 1960. And they thought their audience would be very, very upset having somebody looking that good in capri pants. They didn't worry much about Lucy. But then again, Lucy was in her 40s already. The pregnancy. During I Love Lucy's second year, 52-53, while she was pregnant, she couldn't do all 36 episodes, so she'd have to miss the program. At that point, you didn't show reruns. Didn't show reruns at all. That creates a problem. So Desi and Jess Oppenheimer come up with an idea, unusual for the time. We got 39 shows on the shelf. Why don't we pull one off the shelf, give it to CBS, let them run it, they can run it, and let's see what happens. It's a repeat, but then again, there are new stations that have come on. They do. It's a ratings winner, and Desi and Lucy come up with a new revenue stream for TV called syndication. It's made Jerry Seinfeld $250 million syndication. He should be down on his hands and knees every day thanking Lucy and Desi and Jess Oppenheimer for coming up with this idea. Desi Lou went on to invent the concept of rerun. They used profits from the I Love Lucy show syndication to fund their studio, Desi Lou. Lucy and Desi were television's first millionaires. The pregnancy. Dwight Eisenhower was sworn in as president of the United States on January 20th, 1953. Lucy has her TV baby on January 19th, 1953, and it draws substantially more viewers than Ike's swearing in. 44 million Americans watch the I Love Lucy show where she gives birth. The next day, Eisenhower gets 15 million less viewers. Hey, they survived the interracial marriage. They survived the pregnancy. Everything should be great from here on in. They should run 5 or 6 years without any problems. You know, that's about the lifespan of the show, 5 or 6 years, if that much, because you got to keep coming up with new ideas, and that may be a problem, coming up with new ideas. The show is almost derailed in September 1953. Registered Red, 1936, Lucille, New York Daily News. Star denies she voted commie. Remember I talked to you about Fred Hunt, her grandfather, who almost ended her career in 1936 with this. Miss Lucille D. Ball, 1344 North Ogden Drive East. Actress. She intends to affiliate at the ensuing primary election with the Communist Party. Got her dead to rights. Dead to rights as a communist. They have the proof. Now, this comes out in 1953. There was something called red channels. Hollywood Reporter first exposed communists or alleged communists in 1947, including Dalton Trumbull. Walt Disney accused the people behind the Writers Guild strike in 1941 that impacted him of being supported by the communists. In the 1940s, Ronald Reagan said there were a whole bunch of communists in Hollywood. And then there was Red Channels. And Red Channels was the track that told you, or alleged communists. And this is one of their tracks. Americans don't patronize Reds. You can drive the Reds out of television, radio, and Hollywood. This track will tell you how. Why we must drive them out. The Reds have made our screen, radio, and TV Moscow's most effective fifth column in America. The Reds of Hollywood and Broadway have always been the chief financial support of communist propaganda in America. Our own films, made by Red producers, directors, writers, are being used by Moscow in Asia, Africa, the Balkans, and throughout Europe to create hatred of America. Right now, films are being made to craftily glorify Marxism. I'll tell you what, I used to watch Duck Soup and Horse Feathers, Night at the Opera. That glorified Marxism. Oh, the comedy guys. Oh, Marxism, the Karl Marx guys. Okay. UNESCO and One Worldism. Via your TV set, they are being piped into your living room and are poisoning the mind of your children under your very eyes. I was born in 1956 during the Red Scare. So remember, if you patronize a film made by Red producers, writers, stars, and studios, you're aiding and abetting communism. Every time you permit Reds to come into your living room via your TV set, you are helping Moscow and the internationalists destroy America. Right at the baby boomers watching TV. The Red Scare, the Blacklist, involved the practice of denying employment to entertainment industry professionals believed to be or have been communists or communist sympathizers. Not just actors, but screenwriters, directors, musicians, and other American entertainment professionals were barred from work by the studios. I'll give you some examples. Pert Kelton. Pert Kelton was the original Alice Cramden on the Cavalcade of Stars on Dumont TV in 1951. She was Alice Cramden, and she was dropped from her role and then blacklisted. She was replaced by Audrey Meadows. Jackie Gleason didn't have much, in those days, much pull. The producers were the ones who pulled her. He didn't want to get rid of her. In fact, he rehired her 15 years later when he did the American Screen Scene, whatever it was called, show, the Jackie Gleason show on CBS on Saturday nights. From Miami. He brought her back as Alice Cramden's mother-in-law. The producer said her departure was based on heart problems. She had a bad heart. Hazel Scott, the actress and classical pianist, the first person of color on TV, Afro-Caribbean. She went to Juilliard. She had a show on Dumont. The show came to an abrupt end after a few months. She was named the Red Channels, the pamphlet I just read from, as a communist sympathizer. She decides she's going to testify before the House and Un-American Activities Committee to defend herself. Well, as soon as she does that, the sponsors drop her, and Dumont ends the show. Eddie Albert survived. Lucille Ball survived. Leonard Bernstein survived. This guy killed himself. Philip Loeb. 1955, the actor Philip Loeb, Zero Mostel's friend. Zero Mostel wrote extensively about him and what a rat Edward G. Robinson was and all the others who turned in people like Philip Loeb. Checked himself into the Taft Hotel in Midtown Manhattan under a false name, took a fatal dose of sleeping pills. Couldn't work, had a special needs kid. He was on the Goldbergs. He was kicked off the Goldbergs, but Gertrude Berg slipped him some money until the Goldbergs were killed off on TV. Goldbergs didn't work without Philip Loeb being on. He couldn't find work anymore. He was once a co-star of TV's first situation comedy. McCarthyism and blackballism, the fight for America. September 4th, 1953, Lucille Ball decides, I'm going to talk to the House on Un-American Activities and give her story. So our grandfather, Fred Hunt, just wanted us to. We just did something to please him. I didn't intend to vote that way. As I recall, I didn't. It is thought that the FBI director, J. Edgar Hoover, was a huge fan of the I Love Lucy show. And he might have put the word out, I like Lucy. I want her on. And he may have saved Lucy from being blacklisted and losing her career. Lucille Ball swore to the House committee she had never knowingly aided the Communist Party, aside from placating her grandfather's many requests for room in the garage to organize with his friends. In her autobiography, she observed in herself a strong conservative Puritan streak and proclaimed, I'm the most conservative member of my family. Grandfather. She blames the grandfather because he was a progressive and free thinker. And that's why she registered as a communist. And she gives a news conference. And she doesn't look worse for wear, but take a look at Desi. Desi was thrown out of his country in 1933 as a teenager. 16 years old when he was tossed. Everything was lost because of the Sergeant's Revolt. 20 years later, everything could be lost again. Now, if you've ever gone to a TV show, this is how it works. You walk in and sometimes there's a comedian, the warm-up act. The warm-up act is supposed to be the comedian, him or her, talking to the audience, telling the audience, there's a sign over there, it says applause, you could laugh, and you could do this and that, and then tell some jokes. That was Desi's job before the I Love Lucy shows. He did the studio warm-up. And he addresses the whole thing about Lucy being a communist before episode 68, entitled, The Girls Go Into Business. And you got to remember about the Lucy show, there are two storylines here. There was Lucy and Desi, the married couple, Lucy scheming to get in showbiz. And then there was the friendship between Ethel and Lucy, and Ethel was the right-hand woman and went along with all these schemes and all that other stuff. So there were two things that appealed to people, the Lucy and Desi relationship and the relationship between Ethel and Lucy. Anyway, so he's warming up the audience, and he reuses the line in Hedda Hopper's gossip column. She had a gossip column. She was a former actress. Her father, DeWolf Hopper, was the guy who introduced Casey at the Bat to the vaudeville stage in 1888. Anyway, she talked about Lucy, and she said, the only thing red about Lucy is her hair. And even that's not legitimate. And that's what Desi told the audience. And yeah, he was right. Look at that. She's a brunette. She's a brunette. Shortly after she signed with MGM back in the 1940s, the studio hairstylist Sidney Gelleroff changed her hair from brown to red. 1943, she was in a movie called The Barry Was a Lady, which was in color, and she debuted her new hair to the movie audiences. And she got another derisive nickname, Technicolor Tessie. She was not a natural redhead. And then there's Confidential Magazine. I actually worked for a guy who wrote for Confidential Magazine, a guy by the name of Selig Adler. I was about 22 years old at the time. He was a guy in his 60s, and he was a muckety guy who was basically involved with scandal. In 1944, although the magazine did do some due diligence until it didn't, and there was a problem there. Anyway, so this is January 1955, Confidential, and the lowdown. Does Desi really love Lucy? And the accusation that Desi is cheating. Well, it was an old story, but Confidential Magazine, Desi was cheating on his wife, Lucille Ball, according to Continental. But quote, I knew Desi was inviting me for more than a drink, said the Babe. But there was a story from the 1940s when Lucy and Desi were separated. Oh, the Babe quoted was a prostitute on Confidential's payroll. It was still both safe and lucrative to run a story entitled, Does Desi Really Love Lucy? Lucy was given the Confidential Magazine, looked at it and said, oh, I've seen worse. It was a tough gig. She caught colds, had crying spells, broke 2 fingers, sprained her ankle 3 times, pulled a tendon, sweated off 19 pounds, came down with a virus, went on hiatus. She recovered at the beach. She fainted on stage, and she fainted on stage again. The production crew set up an oxygen tank for her in the wing. She fainted again. By 1956, both Lucy and Desi are at the end of the line. The show had taken its toll. They decide, hey, we got 181 episodes of this sitting on the shelf. We don't have a distribution arm. CBS does. They have affiliates. They could send their shows to affiliates. Let's sell it. Then they do. They sell all the shows for $5 million. Like I said, Seinfeld got $250 million for his shows that ran from 1990 or so to 1997. And the rerun industry was born because of Lucy and Desi. With that money, they would buy the RKO studio lot where Lucy had failed 15 years earlier, or actually more than 15 years earlier, about 18 years earlier in Hollywood. And they would film other shows, filmed in Hollywood by Desi Lou. The Culver City lot would become the outdoor setting for a number of shows, including Make Room for Daddy and the indoor setting, Make Room for Daddy, The Andy Griffith Show, Mission Impossible, Hogan's Heroes, Batman, Star Trek, and many others. Oh, whatever happened to My Favorite Husband? Well, it ended up on TV. It ended the radio run in 1951 when Lucy went to TV, but was revived in 1953 by CBS. And they put it on starring Joan Caulfield and Barry Nelson. Caulfield and Barry Nelson. They are Liz and George Hooper. The show runs 2.5 seasons, from September 1953 to December 1955. The first 2 years produced at CBS Television City, out near the Farmers Market in the Grove, where The Price is Right is shot, Let's Make a Deal is shot. CBS was going to sell that property, but the land is so valuable there. And also, they didn't sell it because there's actually a shortage of studios in Los Angeles, shortage of studios in New York. They're building a sound stage up not too far north of you, probably about 4 miles north of you, up in Yonkers, because New York they really need sound sets for all the networks that are out there, which is about 60. So anyway, the show switches and it's filmed at Desi Lou for the last season. So Lucy is making money off of the show that propelled her onto TV, My Favorite Husband. There was an occasional show from Lucy and Desi between 57 and 1960. In 57, they said, we're done, we're out of here. They turned down what basically was a $3.5 million deal from CBS to do 39 new shows, plus 13 repeats. They said no, they had it. But they do strike a deal with Ford and get $2.5 million out of it to sponsor 5 Lucy Desi specials. Ford was spending a lot of money on TV because they were introducing the insulin. Desi had health problems as well, and that was it. They were gone. They still had some shows that were on, including the Ed Southern show. They also had the Untouchables. Lucy was more than partially responsible for moving most of American television production from New York to Los Angeles, which stayed behind in New York. Network News, the Ed Sullivan Show, and a handful of others, but and there were some shows in Washington, the political shows, but most of television was in Los Angeles by this point. And there was another show called the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse, and this would give birth to 2 shows. The Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse ran on CBS, 58 to 60, 48 episodes between the two, in the 2 years, 3 years TV-wise, and 2 of them would serve as pilots for television series. One, Rod Serling in the Twilight Zone. Remember, Lucy knew talent, and she was the artistic director of Desilu, and she thought Rod Serling had talent. And Untouchables, 2 episodes. Lucy would, this is in name only, make her debut as a producer with a 1959 episode of the Westinghouse Desilu Playhouse. Rod Serling, Lucy knew talent. Rod Serling and Desilu get together, and she puts Rod Serling's work on the Desilu Playhouse. It was called The Time Element, starring William Bendix. CBS loved it, obviously, because they went right to Rod Serling. They cut out the middleman, which was Lucy, and Desi, and said, hey, how would you like to do that science fiction fantasy show for us? He called it the Twilight Zone, started in 1959, ended in 1964. That was a Desilu original presentation. And the Untouchables, Robert Stack as Elliott Ness. Desilu aired a 2-part drama called The Untouchables. A guy by the name of Paul Monish adopted the 1957 memoirs of the Treasury agent Elliott Ness. I've been told that it was more like Elliott Ness thinking about things and memoirs. And Robert Stack played Elliott Ness. CBS said no to the show, but ABC said we want it, and it was on for 4 years. They split in 1960. Lucy says, Desi, well, she charges him with extreme cruelty, subjected her to grievous mental suffering, and tried so hard to be fair and solve our problems. But now I find it impossible to go on. But the split, they were friendly. They remained friends and business partners. So much so in 1961, Desi calls Lucy, Lucy, studio's not doing well. You need to go back to work. She does. The Lucy Show. The Ann Southern Show is gone. Angel and Guess What Hope, gone. Just the Untouchables, and that becomes unshaky because the Italian Defamation League calls up Desi and says, you know, not every Italian commits crimes. Desi anglicizes the names. People weren't interested anymore. Well, Frank and Nitti was still there, but people weren't interested anymore. So Desi says to Lucy, let's start, you got to start a new show. We need CBS to pump some money into Desilu. And initially, he said, no. And she said, I'm Lucy. How much money are you making off of me? Okay. Oh, yeah. Vivian Vance, she's coming back. Remember, that was the second story, or maybe the first story in I Love Lucy, the relationship between Ethel and Lucy. Oh, and we want our old Monday night time slot back. All right. Oh, yeah, and Vivian Vance, I'm going to be a widow, but Vivian Vance, her character, first divorced woman on primetime TV. The Odd Couple came later. The 2 characters were like Felix and Oscar in a way. The sidekick, Vivian Vance. 1962, Desi calls Lucy, Lucy, I want to leave. She gives him $2.5 million for his 350 shares of stock. She's the boss. She is running the show. November 1962, he resigns as president. She becomes the first woman to have a major studio, one of the most powerful women in Hollywood, one of the most powerful women in the United States, one of the most powerful businesswomen in the world. Before Betty Friedan, Gloria Steinem, before Bella Abzug, before the National Organization of Women, she shatters the glass ceiling, but nobody ever thinks of her. Nobody ever thinks of her as a women's liberation pioneer. But she was. She makes a decision. The first show that they're going to do in syndication, she starts a syndication arm, Fractured Flickers. Great for me. I'm 8 years old. I get to see Dudley Do-Right, who I didn't really like, and his arch villain, Snidely Whiplash, who I loved. I loved the bad guy. I get to see them, and I get to see Sherman and Peabody and Fractured Flickers. It's all great from the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, and it's aimed at people like me when I'm 8 years old in 1964 from J. Ward Productions. She keeps most of the people that she had hired. She decides that the show, Here's Lucy, should be in color because when it makes its end, and eventually it would end, she thought color shows would be more valuable than black and white. CBS did not put shows on in color until 1965, one of the last black and white shows. The Ed Sullivan Show with the Beatles on in 1965, doing their songs in black and white, and the hair is red. CBS would go to color in 1965. And now the business executive. Here come the shows. Mission Impossible. That comes on the air in 1966. Mannix comes on in 1967. Board of directors have no problems putting those two shows on. But Star Trek is a problem, a major problem, where no man has ever gone before. Or should I say where no woman has ever gone before. Lucille Ball has two proposals in 1964-65 for shows. One of them, Gene Roddenberry's Star Trek. The other, Mission Impossible. Board of directors happy with Mission Impossible? Yeah, let's go ahead. It's great. We'll do it. Let's do it. The other, Star Trek. No, we're not doing that. Well, it's up to Lucy. We're not doing it. Too expensive. It's going to bankrupt us. Lucy said, we're doing it. You sure? Yeah, we're doing it. I'm the boss. I sign the paychecks. They do. And their first pilot is called The Cage, and it's sent over to NBC. And NBC is not too interested in The Cage. Lucille Ball initially thought the series was about traveling USO performers like her, actors and actresses, performing to Army, Navy, military personnel. And she told her board of directors, we're going to get this done. They said, no, you can't. She said, yes, we can. Gene Roddenberry told Lucy and all his friends that this is Wagon Train to the Stars. Remember the ABC TV show, The Western Wagon Train? Network TV, not interested. Desi Lou's board, not interested. Lucy, she didn't feel that way. Didn't at all. NBC says, we like this guy, Spock, Leonard Nimoy from Boston. Father was the neighborhood barber up there. All the Jewish kids in northwestern Boston, like my friend Shelley Saltman, who grew up with Leonard Nimoy. Well, Leonard Bernstein was up there. Barry Morse was up there. Barbara Walters was up there. It was quite the colony. David Susskind was up there. The pilot, The Cage, flopped. NBC did order a second pilot where no man has ever gone before. Leonard Nimoy's Mr. Spock. His father's name was Max, the neighborhood barber. Mr. Spock, the half Vulcan, half human. It's the only one who stayed. Lucy said, my company, I'm going to pay for this. Board of directors said, no, 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 no. I'm paying for it. The rest is history. Star Trek's worth more than $1 billion now. She sells the company in 1967 to Engulf and Devour, Gulf and Western, for $17 million. Now about $150 million. A bargain. This thing should have gone for probably a couple $1 billion, but it's 1967. They also bought Paramount Television, same time, rather Paramount Pictures. They renamed themselves Paramount TV. They did The Odd Couple and other things. Today it's CBS Television Studios, and they have a piece of Jeopardy and Wheel of Fortune. Lucy establishes her new production company, Lucille Ball Productions, in 1968, with one new series, Here's Lucy. That runs until 1974, and she's out of there. She decides to go make some movies. She bombs out the movies again. She's a little screen star. Television, not so much on Broadway or the big screen, silver screen. In 1977, she teaches an 8-week class on comedy at Cal State Northridge, north of LA, where they had the big earthquake in 1994. This was a woman who never went to college, and she's teaching college courses on comedy. Her last big success is with Tom Cruise, 1983, Lucille Ball Productions, All the Right Moves. Produced by Lucille Ball Productions, starring Tom Cruise, 1983, listed as the co-executive producer of the movie with her second husband, Gary Morton, in addition to Philip Goldfarb and Stephen Dorff. The movie is about a high school football player named Cruise who was looking for a college scholarship, playing football, and he did not want to end up like his father and brother who worked at the steel mills. Lucy did not know when to get off the stage, although she told Barbara Walters she knew when to get off the stage. The only guy who I ever met told me he knew the right time to get off the stage was Bob Merrill, Robert Merrill, who I knew and was friendly with. And that's a long story. But anyway, Bob Merrill, of course, the great tenor. One day we were talking and he says, "Hey, what's the difference between me and Sinatra?" I said, "I don't know, maybe $1 billion. He said, "No, besides that." I said, "Well, what's the difference?" He said, "Unlike Sinatra, I knew when it was time to get off the stage." Lucy did not get off the stage. She's 75 years old. She got Gail Gordon in there, who goes back to the show My Favorite Husband. This is 1985, and this is a disaster. ABC orders 13 weeks of shows. It lasts 8 shows. Nobody watched it. It was a terrible show. She is last seen at the Emmys, 78-year-old Lucille Ball in 1989. She has some heart problems a few months later and passes on, and that should be the end of our story. Wasn't. Desi Arnaz said, "I Love Lucy" was more than the name of the show. He loved Lucy. CBS also loved Lucy. Lucille Ball paved the way for women to be taken seriously in business in the 1950s and 60s. She was the artistic head of Desilu. I Love Lucy is still making money more than 64 years after the last show had aired in 1957. In the year 2020, the last time CBS spoke about money on the show, the CBS president, Les Movies, said the show was making the company $20 million annually, and I'm willing to bet 9 years later it's making more money. But we're not done yet. No, we're not done yet. There's a Netflix movie coming out pretty soon called Being the Ricardos, starring Aaron Sorkin, or rather written and directed by Aaron Sorkin, and Nicole Kidman is Lucy, and Javier Bardem is Desi. It's going to be called Being the Ricardos. It takes place over a course of a week where the production of I Love Lucy sees Lucy and Desi encounter a crisis that could jeopardize their careers and marriage. Yet there's more. Wait, there's more. Ron Howard is now doing a documentary on Lucille Ball. And Sirius XM Radio is putting on shows that Lucy did on CBS Radio back in 1964-65. Little 10-minute segments that she did with her friends, Dick Van Dyke, Frank Sinatra, and others, which was part of the CBS series back then. Now people are saying, well, she's the mother of the podcast. Well, she really wasn't. CBS was doing a lot of that. They were doing Spectrum, which I always wanted to be on in the 70s. That's what I attained to. I wanted to be one of those Spectrum guys. Never happened, unfortunately. Getting close, never happened. So Lucy is not going out of style. 2 new productions, the radio show now. When Lucy hasn't been with us in 32 years. Would be 110 years old now, and yet she has not gone out of style. I want to thank Vicki for inviting me. I want to thank everybody for being here today. We are going to see you soon in house, and if anybody has any questions or comments.